Hey, everybody. This is Nevin, your host of the Populist Patriot. With me is the one and only J.R. Nyquist, geopolitical analyst extraordinaire. Jeff is a prolific author. He has a blog, J.R. Nyquist blog, which reproduces he writes the really the best geopolitical analysis that is available on Russia, China, the threat of international communism, the threat of domestic communism, and really the entire totalitarian colossus that currently threatens the continental United States. Jeff and I agree on the threat of Russia and China, and we both seek to stop it. So it's been a long time, Jeff. How you doing?
Okay, I've been busy, so it's been hard to keep up. So how are you doing there? Pretty good?
Yeah, doing well. Staying physically fit, living a healthy lifestyle. Just did my stand-up paddleboarding, and been doing that for the past couple of days, and just trying to keep up with global politics.
A lot to keep up with. Yep, a lot
Yes.
going on there. Um, yeah, you were telling me you were reading some things about movements of things in China and what's going on. There's been some movement of core headquarters in China, one down to Hainan Island. Very unusual, like a core, moving a core to the coast. Jennifer Zhang has published videos of long convoys of armored vehicles moving to the coast. Not sure if that is significant because China's always moving troops around, but you probably know they've got this exercise going on. The Ronald Reagan is down there in the South China Sea, and of course, Mr. Wang of Luda Media has saying that starting tomorrow, August 1st, they've got something they want to unfold. Some kind of possibly ratcheting up a blockade on Taiwan, some kind of operation that's going to begin to unfold tomorrow. So I guess we're going to see.
Oh dear, yes. Some good details there about what's going on. For the viewers, could you tell them where Hainan Island is? Because we might have some people that might not be familiar with
Yeah,
the
it's
geography.
a pretty good sized island on the south coast of China, not far from Vietnam. It's way down there in the south, sort of where almost where China and Vietnam come together.
Hmm. And what other information have you had about Chinese troop movements towards Taiwan? Have you gotten any additional information that you've heard?
Well, I know that there's been ro-ro ships sighted that are loaded with tanks, but a not sufficient amount. I just read a report just a few hours ago. Not sufficient number of tanks to indicate that an invasion is imminent. More like they're flexing their muscles. So we're going to see. Luda Media, Mr. Wang said they weren't going to invade Taiwan. They were going to blockade it. They were going to do things short of invading it. And of course, we have Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House's trip to the Far East. We don't know if she's going to land in Taiwan. The Chinese have made a big fuss about it, saying that it's not acceptable for them. So, are they going to use that as a justification? Are they looking for some kind of provocation? We don't know, but they're definitely the Chinese are agitated right now. The Chinese communists.
Yeah, and in fact, they said in response to Speaker Pelosi possibly visiting Taiwan, Xi Jinping actually said in a phone call to President Biden that basically we're going to fight fire with fire. I'm slightly mangling what he said, but it's very serious, and I took it as possibly a not so cryptic threat of a nuclear attack against the United States.
Yeah,
And I
people
think
who play with fire get burned.
exactly,
Yeah,
precisely.
yeah. Of course, you hope it's not radiation burns, right? Um, yeah, it's a very strange this atmosphere of threat, constant threat coming from Russia and China. I mean, all these people trying to pick up the Russian propaganda as if we're threatening them. Look, all the threats have come out of the mouth of Russian and Chinese officials. All the threats of nuclear war, threats to use tsunami bombs. threats to do all kinds of things. And why? What is this really about? Why are they ramping all this up? Why invade countries like Ukraine and threaten to invade or blockade Taiwan? What's the timing here?
Well, and that's the interesting thing. I mean, the Russians, as we talked about off air, the one of the Duma, who was Duma members, who was a United Russia Party member, discussed re-annexing Alaska, which is something that's always been in the Soviet/Russian war planning, as you and I have talked about and researched before. We take a look at Putin has made threats against. You were mentioning something to me off air about Russian troops, him getting to Lisbon. Could you talk about that
Well,
story
there
with the
was a
audience?
few weeks ago now, a Russian official said that they were going to own, I think this was in Moscow Times, Russia was going to own Europe all the way down to Lisbon. In other words, they were going to take over Europe, and it's just a matter of time before they take the whole thing. This is the kind of braggadocio we're hearing from the Russian side. Um, So why are they doing this? Why the aggression in Ukraine? Why the threats? Now, they were threatening Sweden and Finland about joining NATO. Now, Sweden and Finland are joining NATO, and Putin is sort of subdued about it, saying, well, that's okay. You're not like Ukraine. We haven't had the trouble with you that we've had with Ukraine. Very odd, nothing consistent out of the Russians, and all kinds of lies and propaganda justifying, their actions in a variety of different ways, none of which are entirely honest.
Mm, mm. I mean, what do you see Putin's strategy at this point then? Why do you think he's not threatening Sweden and Finland? Why do you think he's saying, well, I'm going to launch another attack against them and teach them
Yeah,
like I did Ukraine? What do you think his strategy is at this point?
I think that I watched Sergei Lavrov, and after the pandemic, you'll notice that is even before in the days before the pandemic broke out in the early January of 2020, Putin fired his whole government. And it was a really dramatic event, and so you knew something was up. And I think part of the government went into bunkers. And the next thing I know is Sergei Lavrov, who supposedly fired his foreign minister. He's back as foreign minister, and he's doing a press conference in a bunker, right? Early
Mm.
part of the pandemic, and it's like, what's going on? And he was not himself. He was not his usual cool, collected self. He seemed very upset, distracted, nervous. And I showed the video to somebody in intelligence, and I said, this is a bunker. This is a Russian bunker he's broadcasting from, right? I mean, look at this. Look at the way it's constructed. And he said, yep, that's a Russian bunker. So what was going on then? They were in, I think they were in the early years. I think that 9/11, 9/11, I think the COVID outbreak was a biological attack, is my guess. They knew it was a biological attack, and they were worried that we would catch on and we would retaliate on them, both China and Russia. And I think China, they were acting guilty. That's all I can say is I watched that very closely, and you had some very strange things towards the end of March after we started the lockdowns here, where you had the strategic command dispersed the SAC bombers, the strategic bombers, claiming what bad weather. They needed to disperse the bombers because of bad weather. And you had the nuclear command staff for nuclear war placed in deep bunkers in Colorado. Things like this that were like pre-nuclear war moves from our side back in March and early April of 2020. And then the same thing you were seeing out of China. In May, you had governments in Southeast Asia, communist governments like Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, being told that China and Russia were engaged in a plan that was going to eventually lead to thunderous war with America. You had different people with contacts in China and Chinese saying, we're getting ready for war. Chinese military newspapers saying war is coming, get ready, this is not a drill. So you've had this buildup all this time. Since 2020, you've had 2 years of these more intensive preparations. And then on May 14th, Mr. Wang of Luda Media got hold of that 56, 57-minute audio recording of the fusion military civil meeting in Guangdong province, chaired by the head of the military district and the governor of Guangdong, about transitioning Guangdong from normal to war, right? And preparing ro-ro ships, you know, um, preparing 64 10,000-ton ro-ro ships to retrofitting them to carry tanks and armored fighting vehicles, 953 or so merchant ships to be gotten ready to support operations in the Pacific. And what Mr. Wang said, no, they're not invading Taiwan, they're blockading it, but they're going to invade the first and second island chains and beyond. A large Pacific operation, talking about, you know, if the United States doesn't basically accept Chinese control of half the Pacific, that they were going to launch an attack against our fleet, including the use of strategic nuclear weapons. And that when Putin went to China on February 4th, they signed a secret military treaty, and that China is supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine in ways that we can't fully see or know what they are, supporting the Russian economy, for example. So this is very alarming information, and I think we have to take it serious.
Oh, we do. And what do you see one clenched fist coming? Because that's the $64,000 question for many of your followers. When is that coming?
I think it's now. I think clearly they're doing it. It's one clenched fist now. Look, Mr. Wang says that the best part of the Russian military is in the Far East preparing to invade Alaska. And you've got this window, invasion window through September, while the Arctic is, you know, the Arctic ice, sea ice is back, and you can move the Russian Navy from Murmansk across to Alaska and the Bering Strait. You've got the ability to invade by air and sea this part of North America, to go into northern Canada, to get into places, maybe into Hudson's Bay or something. So this is kind of alarming, because countries like Canada, countries like Australia, various countries in Europe, they're not ready for war. The U.S. is kind of ready. We're not up to full speed, but we're the only seemingly Western country that's, except for maybe Poland and Ukraine, that are really ready. And here, this full-blown war in Ukraine, which is very scary, and the potential of nuclear war. Monkey Works reported 2-3 weeks ago that the Russians had put all 70 of their submarines to sea, which, if true, they've been surging their subs, and then they've been sneaking back to port and then resurging, like to try to wear us out, you know. And how many of their subs are at sea right now? I don't know. Military experts say, Monkey Works, not quite sure about that, but there is increased Russian submarine activity, and I would guess increased Chinese naval activity right now, of course. So you could say we're in that area of a Cuban Missile Crisis situation, where the Russians and the Chinese and their allies in the Western Hemisphere are going to have a military exercise here in the Western Hemisphere in September. And Russia's getting ready for its Vostok exercises. They just announced on August 30th, I think September 5th. So these are all worrying.
Yes, and I was going to bring up the Western Hemisphere. I believe there already was an exercise of Iran, China, and Russia off the coast of Venezuela, their naval units, or something that's upcoming too as well. I mean, what should we do about our own backyard? Because they're in our backyard already. And how serious is this with them in Nicaragua, in Cuba, and in Venezuela? Now, I know Venezuela has had some massive political troubles. I mean, I don't know how much of a good ally they would be, but they still nevertheless is a dangerous geopolitical ally of Russia and China. Could you tell us what's more about what's going on in the Western Hemisphere?
Well, of course, Daniel Ortega's regime has publicly asked for Russian troops, planes, and ships. And Russia said, yeah, in the second half of this year, which we're in right now, they're going to send them. So if Ortega's regime is threatened by an internal rebellion, they're going to have Russian troops to help them put it down, maybe. You've got stories, going back more than 20 years, Scott Gulbranson, about Russian, Chinese, and Cuban, North Korean presence in Mexico. You've got Alex Bachman now saying similar things, the Mexican journalist, saying that the Santa Maria Islands are being used to train for a kind of invasion of Mexico by Iranians, North Koreans, Cubans, Russians, Chinese. Um, Kind of alarming Russian and Chinese presence in Mexico. These stories, if they can be verified, there's one could say it's either an urban legend or it's true. It's very funny. The government and the state governments are suddenly getting serious about putting a border wall up. So that's kind of interesting. Maybe the federal government's got to wake up and they realize they got a real problem down there. There is a rumor, Alex Bachman said that there are 2 Chinese nuclear weapons in Mexico that they would like to move across the border. I don't know if that's true. I don't know how accurate his information is. But look, it's the kind of thing you'd expect to hear right now. You've got attempts of the Chinese to get into Canada by bribing Indian tribes. You've got um, all kinds of, China's all over the map. They're changing the markings. They're getting rid of the Chinese characters on the sides of their merchant ships, and they're registering them Panamanian and putting Roman letters on the sides. So I've seen some of the photographs. So what is this about? Is there going to be a general invasion of the Pacific? There's a lot of islands that are not garrisoned, that are wide open, that have flirted with Chinese money. Are the Chinese going to occupy the Solomons? Are they going to occupy other islands that don't have, Western or Australian or other Western garrisons? And then you have the provocations against Japan by Russia and China, moving ships in their waters, sending bombers and planes to violate Japanese airspace. What is this business of pushing on Japan? And then you have the assassination of Shinzo Abe, which we still don't know the full details on that yet. So the Far East is heating up in parallel with Russia and Ukraine. And you asked before about Ukraine, what is going on there. I spoke with some people. I've spoke to a number of people over there, and it's very clear that Russia is losing the war in Ukraine. They cannot win the war conventionally with conventional weapons. Supposedly, they've raised another 100,000 troops. We'll see if that's true. There's lots of stories about manpower shortages. What's really bad is the HIMAR rocket launcher, mobile rocket launcher systems that we have sent to them. They've got 12. They're going to have 16. According to the Pentagon, they have destroyed in recent weeks over 50 Russian ammunition depots, which has completely crushed the Russian ability to continue, raining 20,000 shells a day down on the Ukrainians. This has been the basis of the very slow grinding Russian offensive, and there's been for the last 2 weeks or more, it's what you call a pause. Well, that pause is due to the fact that their ammunition isn't there. They can't continue to push. A Ukrainian counteroffensive is coming, and that counteroffensive may prove very devastating.
And what do you think the Russians would do next if it proves to be devastating? Do you think Putin would use weapons of mass destructions, if you will, to break down Ukrainian resistance, or do you think that's too risky strategically?
There's reports that the Russians are using phosphorus shells, which are illegal by international law. Those are shells used by the Americans on the Germans in World War II. They're very nasty. They'll burn right through your skin. They'll practically burn you down to the bone. But they light things on fire. You drop these phosphorus shells on something, it'll burn down a forest, it'll burn down a town, light the roofs on fire. It's just extremely hot, nasty weapon. And so the Russians are willing to break international law in what they're doing. And I think my concern is that they have mass-produced thermobaric bombs. These are conventional bombs with the firepower of a tactical nuke. They are technically not allowed by the rules of war, but Russians excuse themselves all the time. They've always got an excuse to break the rules, break a treaty, break their word. So it will be interesting to see. They could also go a full-on nuke. The Ukrainians could just simply get hit by tactical nuclear weapons fired by the Russian artillery, of course. Um, I don't know if the Russians now are in a panic to get their nuclear ordnance out of range of the HIMARS system. Because if the HIMARS system can destroy conventional ammunition stockpiles, they could certainly go after the nuclear ones. And that could be quite a mess for the Russians. So if I'm the Russians, I'm moving those things back. But again, thermobaric warheads, it doesn't take very many of those, and you might be able to have an effect. There's some indication that the Russians want to renew their double envelopment attack on Ukraine like they did in February, where they attacked, remember, from Belarusia, and they
Mhm.
tried to move on Odessa, and that they're going to try to do something like that again. But Lukashenko, the Russians don't have the troops apparently. There are some troops. We don't know how many Russian troops in Belarusia, but Lukashenko, the dictator in Belarus, was asked to come to a meeting. He's been under pressure to use his army to go south. He had apparently bad hemorrhoids and couldn't go to the meeting. So, that sounds like a typical excuse. I think Ukraine can't. I think Belarusia just doesn't have the wherewithal. Their units aren't good enough. Ukraine has really got a lot of manpower on the tap. The whole nation is rallied to this. Russians aren't motivated. Belarusians aren't motivated. Um, well, I guess we're going to have to see whether the Russians are sandbagging if they can come up with new large reinforcements of forces. So far, not. So
Mm.
far, not. Or whether they'll resort to thermobarics or they'll use tactical nukes. I mean, if there's submarine fleets at sea, it's like they're pointing the nuclear gun at our head, and saying, all right, we're going to use tactical nukes on the Ukrainians. If you do anything to help them, we're just going to nuke you now. I don't know what that is. I don't know at the higher levels of diplomacy. You saw there's some indications of something from on high because New York City had that nuclear civil defense warning, and then another one about having your bug out bag. So this is very unusual coming out of New York. What is it that they're hearing? What is the the Federal Emergency Management Agency learning? What have they been told? What has the government been told? What has the military been told? Um,
True enough.
yeah,
True enough. In Taiwan, they've been having, of course, all kinds of drills too, as well. Emergency air raid drills, their practice maneuvers, cities, street fighting, and everything else. What do you think the United States, based on your sources and your knowledge of, military policy, what do you think the Biden administration's response would be if communist China blockades Taiwan, or even launches a weapons of mass destruction attack against Ukraine? If you had to guess, I know it's a
yeah.
hard question,
Well, you
but
see, the after what happened in Afghanistan a year ago, the Biden administration looks so weak on foreign policy and devastatingly so. And with the economy, he's blaming gas station owners for jacking up the price of gas when he knows perfectly well what he did with the Keystone Pipeline and how their environmental policies make it not profitable for people to use, for investors to invest in oil refineries. We've got oil refineries that are not operating because nobody wants to operate them. They're going to lose money. They're going to get hurt, and people don't want to do that. So um, the real problem is the administration's weakness is such that what are they able to do politically? What can the administration do politically? And can they afford to look weak? Can they afford to be perceived as having, through that weak look, brought on a crisis? And I think a lot of what you see out of Washington is um, posturing and on the part of Biden, and not really honest about what they've done and how they've managed the military. But maybe some of these generals and admirals who are saying, look, we need weapons, we need things to go right. Maybe the administration's now being pushed around. I should hope so. Um, you know, it, it, you know, it's the weak look is not going to fly. And I think we have a problem with the orientation. You know, what our friend Trevor Loudon thinks about Biden's communist connections, and a lot of the communist connections of Democratic members of Congress. There may be a point at which the left in general wakes up and says, wait a minute, we got communists in the left here, and that they've been calling some of the shots, and we can't allow this anymore. That, you know, you've got people like Naomi Wolf calling out the administration, basically calling Biden a traitor, basically saying that there are communists on the left that have gotten too much power in the government, in the media, in the corporate world. And this is rather interesting development.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. And while we're talking about the left, there are some new groups, left communist extremist groups that are coming to the fore in the United States, like the Uhuru movement, which has known ties to the Russians, as well as the Black Hammer Group, which was recently raided by the FBI. Which I'm sure you heard about, and they are pro-Russian. If you take a look at their website, they're all for Russia. When you have Caleb Maupin, I don't know if you know of him. He used to be employed by Iranian Press TV as well as Russia Today RT. He is a hardline tanky. I don't know if you know the term tanky. It's a term basically originating in UK communist circles in the UK back in the late 60s, early 70s, when the Warsaw Pact invasion of Czechoslovakia occurred. And that caused a split in the British Communist Party. And you had one section that overtly opposed that form of Soviet Warsaw Pact imperialism, and then you had another faction of the British Communist Party that supported Soviet imperialism unequivocally. So you have these sort of what I call the professional anti-imperialists that will support every dictatorship, every terrorist movement, as long as it's against the United States. They'll do that and make excuses for it. And Maupin cut his teeth primarily with the Workers' World Party. Now he has his own organization. It's a think tank called the Center for Political Innovation. And he actually does united fronts with other organizations, other pro-Moscow extremists like the Schiller Institute, which is the part of the Lyndon LaRouche apparatus. Yeah. And he said, Maupin actually said, because I follow what the left elements of the left state, and you know, I follow their YouTube channels to a degree. And Maupin had a recent broadcast on his YouTube channel. He said real communists support Russia because Putin is anti-imperialist and Russia is an anti-imperialist state. And he has said, which I quote in my book, my latest book, that's available on Amazon, I quote him, and he says that even if we disagree with certain countries' policies, you know, if they're against imperialism, we have to support them. No ifs, ands, or buts. So I see, you're right, the left has always been fractured in the United States, especially more and more about China, its treatment of the Uyghurs. You have the ANCOMs, anarcho-communists like the YouTuber Vosh, and others who are hew to a form of socialism, but sort of a worker cooperative type of economic policy. And then you have the other leftists who are YouTubers, as well as various extreme political parties and select members of the U.S. Congress, primarily in the Democratic Party, that are they're just apologists for Cuba, Venezuela, China, Russia, etc. Any comments about the left, the left extremist groups, the fifth column in the United States vis-a-vis Russia and China? Anything recent pieces of information you come up with?
Well, no, it's look, I think people don't realize how radically far left a lot of people in the government are. And I don't think they realize it because people can portray themselves as being center left when they really are Marxists or even Marxist-Leninists, and that they might even have ties to front groups that are working with China and or Russia. And a lot of people don't realize, Yevgeny Albatz, the Russian journalist, has written about this. The Russian special services are working with all the communist parties. They never stop doing that. All the communist parties worldwide are working with the Russian Federation. So that never stopped. So if you think the Russian Federation is anti-communist and they're not really doing that, that's not true. And in fact, to some extent, the CIA has got these people that I went to school with, those kind of people who were on the left, who are now managers at the CIA, got in there under Obama or even earlier. So our institutions are not, if you think the CIA is some kind of right-wing patriotic organization, you really aren't paying attention. You haven't been paying attention for years. I mean, if you read Robert Gates's first memoir about the CIA, he said, well, in the 60s, most of the people that worked for the CIA were, center leftists, or, they were liberals. They weren't conservatives. And people just don't like, what? The CIA is a right-wing anti-communist. No, sorry, you got that wrong. It's not that way. So the picture, of course, is complicated in a society where we have ideological division. But worse than that, both on the right and the left, we have more and more a phenomenon which concerns me, where people don't look at facts. They're immune to the facts. They're ideologists, and they're living in a second reality. They're living in a false world that's created by ideological propositions that they take those propositions for reality instead of any facts that emerge. So they're basically incapable of digesting what's actually going on. And this was like on the East Coast and the East Coast universities, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago. Now it's come across all the country. And then you have the same thing on the alt-right, on the paleo-right, and some of the libertarians. They've got this pro-Russian point of view, anti-Ukrainian point of view in the middle of a war. And it's like, this is a country that didn't commit any crimes. It got invaded by its neighbor that had promised to respect its sovereignty when it gave up its nuclear weapons in 1994. It's pretty cut and dried military aggression. And yet all these conservatives who you would expect would be erstwhile anti-communists and be alert, they look at Putin because Putin has pretended to be a Christian, or Putin has pretended to be a conservative, looking at him as the great white hope. Very confused. So you've got these far left groups that you're talking about that are with the Russians, that are with Putin because he's an anti-imperialist. And you've got these far right groups that are doing the same thing. And this is sort of like in Weimar Germany, where the far right and the far left were squeezing out the middle, right? Where you didn't have moderates, and then you end up with a totalitarian state. So this trend is kind of alarming. And these people who don't listen to reality, they will start shouting at you. I've been on a number of radio shows where I basically shout back over them. I won't let them. They come on, they accuse me of being a propaganda, shill for either the Jews or the Ukrainians or the New World Order, whatever that is, and so on. And it's
You still go,
theory.
that's still, I don't mean to interrupt. Elaborate on that. I mean, I don't know if you want to say which shows, but, this is occurring with you recently to this day when you go on shows?
Oh, yeah. Well, the John Moore show, which I do regularly, I'm on a panel. And you got people that call me up and then they try to do a getcha. They then misrepresent things I've said and to say that I'm wrong. The best way to say somebody is wrong is to put words in your mouth of things you said that you didn't say and then say, see, you were wrong. It's like, but I never said that. That kind of thing. And of course, very angrily saying, you claim the Russians are losing the war. And I said, well, they're not winning the war. And now I'm telling you that without some kind of special weapon or something we don't know they have, they are now, the tide is turning, they are starting to lose the war. And it's a very tough war for both sides, but the Russians really, so much bungling in the war. But for some reason, there's people on the right who style themselves patriots or conservatives who really want Russia to win, and they I will get this even on my website, people saying, how can you possibly say the Russians aren't winning? The Russians are winning. How many months has this war been on? How much territory, how fast are the Russians gaining? In the last 2 weeks, I think Russia has had a net loss in territory gained in the war. It's not much of a loss, but that's not winning. How is that winning?
Well, what is motivating these elements of the paleoconservatives? You wrote a very interesting blog post, and please feel free to summarize it on Jordan Peterson, where he has taken a Russian position. What do you think motivates individuals like a Pat Buchanan or a Michael Savage, which we've talked about before on this show, or in this case, Jordan Peterson? I mean, is it something sinister? Is it something with their disenchantment with elements of Western liberal society or aspects of it? What's going on here, Jeff,
Well,
based on your
there are
analysis?
people who really hate their own society. And look, I'm very frustrated. I know there's problems with the U.S. and the West. I've written very extensively about the degeneration of the West and the problems here. But you don't, if you have a family and you have a son who's bad, he's your son. I mean, it's your country. You got to try to make it better. You don't take it out in back in the barn and put a bullet in its head. I mean, these people have basically, they want their country to lose. I think Hal Turner, I heard an 11-minute rant by Hal Turner, who's one of these people, saying that the U.S. deserves to be nuked. Now, think about how
That's
horrible that
treason.
is.
That's treason,
I
bro.
mean, you
That's
are
treason.
saying that you
Sorry to
think about
interrupt. That's
how
treason.
horrible the regime is in China. You think about how horrible what Russia has done, and you are saying that America is so bad we deserve to be destroyed by a nuclear attack. I mean, what kind of person says that about their own country? First of all, America is not the worst country in the world. Whatever its problems are, we have 6 times the church attendance that Russia has. People make a big deal about Russia being a Christian country. Look, on the last Easter Sunday before the pandemic, 4.3% of Russians went to church on Easter Sunday. I wouldn't call that a Christian country, would you?
No, no,
More
obviously
more
not.
Russians showed up for mosque on that weekend than showed up for Easter Sunday. It's not a Christian country. It's nonsense. It's got the same low church attendance rates that a lot of European countries do. And America, although church attendance has been in decline, is not there on any given Sunday. Half of the people, when you don't have COVID lockdowns, are going to show up for church. So it's just ridiculous to make these claims depending, I mean, if on a good day they have 6% going to church, we got 36% or more. I think it's more like 10-1 rather than 6-1. But, you know, people can argue there's a different statistics people can go, but there's no, and then you look at abortion. Russia has the high, people say, if what would be a measure of how decadent a country is? I would say abortion's a good measure. Well, Russia has the highest abortion rate in the world, even though it's been declining for some years. The highest abortion rate in the world. They're the highest for HIV. I think they've got the most heroin addicts. They're number 2 for alcoholism. This is a demoralized country, demoralized by their awful leaders, by their corrupt leaders, by their horribly corrupt government. People say how corrupt the U.S. government. Yeah, look at the corruption in Russia. It's even worse. So you're going to say we deserve to be nuked? Of all the countries in the world, with all the corruption and all the crime and all the bad things that are happening, we're the worst people in the world? I'm sorry, I don't accept it. It's not right. And so when Jordan Peterson does it, look, all I can say about these people is they have a massively distorted view of the world. They are ideologists and they are living in a false, altered reality where they don't look at reality or they don't have balanced judgment. And they simply decide these things in their mind from some kind of fantasy view of the world. It's very disappointing. Jordan Peterson has this view. And of course, he tries to deny it. He says, he's very equivocal at the beginning. He says, well, what Russia has done is unconscionable. Then he goes on to excuse it and say how bad we are. Like we invaded some European country. I mean, when we invaded Saddam Hussein's Iraq, we were liberating that country from a monster. who was murdering children, who was murdering his own people. In fact, and then people say, oh, we killed a whole bunch of Iraqis. Those numbers are inflated. We used precision ordnance. We weren't opening up with 20,000 rounds of indiscriminately fired howitzer shells every day on them for months on end. That war went by very fast. You know, the idea that we wage war the way they've been doing it there in Ukraine, there's no comparison. And the treatment of prisoners, the purposeful targeting of civilian structures, the atrocities, I'm I'm just sorry. It's just nonsense. And
Oh, I apologize for interrupting you earlier, by the way, when I said I was talking over you and I said that's basically he's a traitor. And basically that is just, let's just call it, he's a traitor, and F him, Hal Turner in this case. And
yeah,
on this show, I know with my guests, I try to be family friendly with my language. And look, on my show, if those of you who've listened to my live streams, I get very angry at our current plutocratic system, how liberalism has been, classical liberalism has been corrupted by big corporations, as well as also by totalitarian geopolitical enemies and their supporters in the United States. I don't like the current iteration of Reagan-style corporate capitalism, but when it comes to aligning yourself with a geopolitical enemy that wants to despoil your country, as you and I have documented in our books and interviews, I mean, you will have to show your papers, or we cart your ass off to a concentration camp and we will put a bullet in your head. I mean, frankly, I'm not trying to sound hyperbolic, but the Russians know who Jeff Nyquist is, audience here. Alexander Litvinenko tried to get in touch with him, as revealed on the Final Phase Forum posts years ago, which means they know who I am, probably, because I have Jeff and other anti-communists and all this anti-communist literature, and been on Cliff Kincaid shows in the past as recently as 2021. I'm sure they know who I am.
they
They're
know who
probably going
all,
to kill
yeah.
me and kill my
Well,
family.
look, they know who all the people are.
These are not nice people.
No, they're criminals, and they kill journalists. Vladimir Putin has ordered, and this is like the killing of Alexander Litvinenko, the killing of Anna Politkovskaya. The idea that these orders don't come from the top is ludicrous. These are criminal acts. Do you think some lower level person's going to commit a murder without getting permission from higher up? I mean, who's going to keep him out of jail then? What did you do? You killed this woman. We're going to have to put you in jail. Come on, nobody would take that on. This is coming from the top, and it's the number of murders that the Russian government has done of dissidents and journalists, and the poisonings, the Skripals there in Salisbury, and in like 30 something, maybe it was more than that, British citizens being exposed, the poisoning of Alexei Navalny with the same kind of chemical warfare agent, a nerve agent, basically a nerve gas. You know, I mean, this is so monstrous. And to compare a country that murders its journalists and people who disagree with the government, to compare that with the United States, is just so wrong. I mean, we're not perfect, but we're not a freaking tyranny that just stomps on their own people. Russians, you've probably watched some of the fascinating Russian podcasting, where they say, yeah, we're going to go to jail for 15 years if we say the wrong thing. I mean, you and I, Nevin, we can say anything here in America, and we're not going to be arrested and go to jail if we disagree
Precisely.
with the government. And I just, I just talked about Naaman Wolf, who called the president of the United States a traitor. So am I going to go to jail? Am I going to be assassinated? The real threat's coming from the gangsters connected with China and Russia, and the fifth column in this country that's working with those same gangsters. Those are the bad guys, and the countries they're threatening: Taiwan, the invasion of Ukraine, the threats to other countries. Their work with organized crime, the cartels in Mexico. I mean, all of this is coming from them. And we have to wake up and we have to say, look, we have a serious enemy. And what happened with the vaccines here? What happened with the pandemic? Was that an attack? What is going on with that? You know, was COVID-19 an attack? We need to ask those questions.
Quick question: did Hal Turner get any pushback for such an asinine, treasonous statement like that?
Oh, I
Do
think
you?
he got the kind of readers that he's had. I think was congratulated for that kind of
That's
thing.
disgusting.
So that our societies are going through this terrible thing since this terrible COVID came out, and we've been struggling with this for the whole time. And we don't have a clear story from China about what happened. And the Chinese are now, have been gearing up for war ever since then. And that what we've had to do to try to get through this, and the confusion on our side, and the bad leadership decisions that we've had, we have to get our act together, and we have to say, look, there are people who are working with Beijing and Moscow here. And Beijing and Moscow, for all those people that want to say Putin's a Christian, how come he's working with Daniel Ortega, a Marxist? How come he's working with China? How come they've been helping North Korea get its nuclear weapons? That's a fact. And the Russians, they're helping every communist regime on the planet, just about, in Africa and Latin America. There's Russian anti-aircraft troops in Caracas, Venezuela now. So what do you think this is? This is the communist bloc revived and amped up, ready to come after us. They've got new missiles. They've got all this other stuff, and they're coming after us. So, and here we've got still so many people living in a bubble, ideologists, people who believe in conspiracy theories or some kind of ideology, whether it's some kind of alt-right thing or some kind of paleocon thing or some kind of libertarian thing. Look, there's good ideas all over the place, but you have to have a common sense philosophy and look at facts. Facts matter, history matters. We have to be fact oriented. And these countries are our enemies. This is objective. And then you say, well, America is worse. And then you start repeating Russian propaganda. You start repeating lies that the Russians have put out, and you go on RT, or you promote basically the same blood libels that were put on Jewish people now put on the Ukrainian regime. Like, the Ukrainian government's not perfect either, but do they deserve to have their cities knocked down, to be invaded, to be forced to being a part of the Russian Federation? Where does Russia get the right to destroy a country and force it to become part of itself? I mean, Russia has 11 time zones. Don't they have enough territory? They need to add Ukraine to them now? It really is ridiculous. Oh, they're backed into a corner. Yeah, 11 time zones of corner they're backed into there. They go all the way from the Ukrainian and Belarusian and the Baltic states border all the way to Alaska, to the Bering Strait. That's an awfully big territory. They're backed into a corner. They're surrounded. You can't surround them. They're too big.
Well, authoritarian expansionist states always like to pose themselves as a victim, when in reality, the United States and Western Europe, the NATO countries, have had a highly contradictory policy. I mean, France, Britain, Germany, they've exported even outright weapons, even as recent as years ago under Obama administration, to Putin's Russia. You have American corporations. We gave permanent normal trade relations, which were supported by a lot of these neoconservative, so-called Tea Party, Bush-type, Ted Cruz-type Republicans, and everything else. And I think, and I want you, Jeff, to expand upon this, because I know this is a huge point you make. I think a part of this problem is we have this view that the Cold War has ended. Georgy Arbatov, Gorbachev, and the Soviet ideologists. It was, you quoted an article by a Professor Tierney at one of the colleges or universities, many colleges or universities in Pennsylvania, I believe. And he wrote about how Georgy Arbatov said, "We will deprive you of the image of the enemy." And that disarmed the West. And what Tierney pointed out very interestingly in the article is that also split apart the national consensus, which was already fraying since the Vietnam War about Cold War policy, but it's split apart the United States. It's split apart this notion, really this culture of a shared destiny. Because to me, my radical civic nationalism is predicated not even per se on the Constitution or liberalism, but it's on we're in this boat together and we have to make policy based on we are on this boat, in this boat together as one people, and we have to survive. And Gorbachev, the Soviet strategy was so clever, it split that apart. And they have said in their open statements, as well as closed declassified documents, which I've talked about in my book, Turning the Page, Volume 1, they talk about how they were doing that to destroy American anti-communism, to split the anti-communist camp, which also Mao Zedong uses a strategy to split apart the anti-communist and imperialist camp. It's really a Leninist strategy. Lenin talked about exploiting contradictions within the imperialist camp. And I mean, how much credence do you put? Do you think the Soviet strategy of the late 1980s was probably one of the most brilliant coups, strategic coups that totally screwed up the American right and our views on Russia? I mean, what are your thoughts about that? Do
Well,
you
the
see that as a big culprit?
The Russians took some damage doing what they did. They gave up Eastern Europe. They gave up, I call it a poison pawn of the former Warsaw Pact countries. I think they thought they were going to be able to hold on to them better than they did. I think they thought they were going to be able to hold on to Ukraine and the Baltic states. They weren't able to do that because certain things happened. Communism was a lot more unpopular. And I think they thought they were, of course, but where they succeeded was they were able to get their pro-Soviet, pro-Marxist people to advance better in the Western culture and Western politics. And you were able to get somebody like Angela Merkel, who was a communist youth leader in East Germany, to become the head of the Christian Democratic Union in Germany. And it's like, wow, you got an East German communist to become the head of the Christian Democratic Union. That's pretty good. And people, this is very controversial, but I wouldn't trust Angela Merkel as far as I could throw her. I don't trust her at all. I don't know for sure what she was really up to, but I don't like it. And you look at the Clintons, horrible. You look at Obama, horrible. Marxists in the Justice Department flood the government with the people on the left. Look at Biden, same thing. Got into the U.S. Senate through Arm and Hammer and the Council for a Livable World, the Communist Front. I mean, these people's connections to not just the left, but the communist left are very well known. This includes the Clintons and their connections to communist think tanks and groups that were written about when they were in the White House. Books like Compromised by the fellow that ran the CIA front company in Arkansas during the Iran-Contra affair about Clinton's involvement with things that were, quite frankly, quite sinister and illegal, and suggest to me some kind of coordination then with the communist bloc. And an attempt to blackmail the vice president of the United States and to recruit, dirty up the CIA through Felix Rodriguez, who was accused in that book of being a KGB double agent, running the CIA Contra resupply. I mean, it's the ways in which we've been infiltrated, the way that was facilitated by the collapse of the Soviet Union. It was an accelerant. And you look at us now, you look at how far left our policies are. We can't build a nuclear weapon in this country. We haven't been able to. We can't keep our armed forces going. We had Marxist riots 2 summers ago, pulling down statues of George Washington, Teddy Roosevelt, and U.S. Grant, around the country. I mean, it's we're in trouble. We're fragmented, and it is this focus on fake ideology, a fake idea of the world, rather than focus on what's real and what's happening to us right now, and the threat right now, the existential threat to our existence, which nobody wants to talk about. And they all poo-pooed for years when I said, look, it's Russia and China, it's Russia and China, it's Russia and China. They're really together. They're coming for us. They're trying to get ready. And people say, oh, no, it's not, that's just Cold War. Look at where we are now. We're not just in a Cold War, we're in a hot war, maybe getting hotter, maybe widening, and we're not ready.
Yes, I've gotten the same thing too. Years ago, back during the Tea Party years of Obama, I was one of the few people that talked about this down here in South Florida. None of the so-called conservative talk shows, the Reagan type neoconservative types like Joyce Kaufman and others, they didn't talk about the threat of Russia and China. Frankly, it was really Trump made it cool to talk about the China threat, whether we liked Trump or not. I mean, and they wouldn't touch, the Republicans would not touch policies of trade, on how free trade and deindustrialization has devastated. The most they'll say to me was, well, we just got to lower taxes more, which totally ignores really what was going on. It's not a tax issue. It's much bigger than that's just a false argument. And I've written extensively about it. And and this is why I've abandoned the Republican Party and the conservative ideology. I used to be a free market libertarian, and then when I studied how capitalism actually is practiced in the United States and the different types of capitalism, I mean, it's just not one set of things. It's not something just, okay, I'm buying a sweater from you and that's it. That's not just capitalism. You have harmful capitalism. This is the position of this show, like the Derridas, what's going on with the institutional investors snapping up all these homes. And what's causing this, and I had a friend who was a communist. He's a young guy. He was now deceased, unfortunately. And he used to be a part of the PSL in St. Petersburg, Florida. And they were the only ones that were really rallying people, tenants that were being squeezed, and home buyers that were being squeezed out of homes because of the very real depredations of corporate capitalism. And I find on this show the people that defend that type of capitalism are ideologues too as well, because the same people that defend that type of capitalism, I've noticed from personal experience as well as my researcher, are the same ones who defend free trade with China, that we can't put tariffs on them. It's freedom. It's their property. They should do whatever they want with their business. And that's when I started to move and formulate my own worldview, because and you can comment on this afterwards, because the show wants to hear you. This is where I started to prioritize and say, which is more important? Untrammeled economic and political classical liberalism and maintaining, quote, the system, or looking at things where, like a parent, and saying, okay, we got to adjust our thinking because we have to survive. We are shared destiny. We're in this boat together. We have to survive in perpetuity, because otherwise, my fear is the country collapses. And I don't think it's going to be pretty. You look at what happened after Hurricane Andrew in parts of Cutler Ridge, Homestead, Miami, where it went into total chaos without law and order. What happened with Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans in the Superdome? Total chaos, police outnumbered and isolated until finally the National Guard and relief was sent belatedly. So it's not going to be a good thing, and people are going to want order amongst chaos, and they're going to look for sources of order in all the wrong places. And that's where I'm coming from. That's how I've become less ideological, if you will. I'm not somebody who believes we should nationalize everything and abolish private property in the means of production like the Marxists. I'm not a Nazi because I don't believe in, obviously, their mass human rights violations and racism, but I'm not also for that extreme amount of control over society and economics. But I'm also not this free market disciple of the Milton Friedmans, the Hayek. I've read Mises' Omnipotent Government. There is some good stuff in there. But at the end of the day, people that use conscript their names and their ideas take it to their logical conclusion, which is something that I no longer support for many reasons that I've gone into it on other shows independently and with other guests. So what say you? What are your thoughts about what I've said? And then the second part is what the hell can we do at this point, at this stage? Is there
Yeah.
anything we can do to rescue the country?
Well, yeah, of course. Well, people are going to do things. Look, what you raised is a question of freedom. Look, economic freedom, the freedom to buy and sell is very important. But your freedom to buy and sell does not include your ability to cavort with our enemies and to give our enemies technology or money they need to come and kill us. So there are obvious areas where the economy these economic powers need to say no. And there's a deeper political sociological problem, and that's a problem of plutocracy. The problem that a Republican system of government, when you have these super wealthy individuals who can buy senators and really pour a lot of money into politics, you end up with a kind of politics made by the wealthy, by the super rich. And you don't want that because then all of a sudden, what is the basis of your leadership, your representatives? Who are they? I've seen again and again, I've heard from people who've run for Congress, friends of mine who've run for Congress and said they don't want smart people to run for Congress. They want stupid people they can control. And who's they? It's the money people. So that they will do what they want and that they won't do what's best for the country or the people. Well, I'm sorry. If a wealthy person is electing Congress people to be puppets to do whatever they want, that's wrong. If you elect a person because you believe in them and that they're smart and you think they're the best person, it doesn't matter how rich you are. If you're giving money to a campaign so that they can vote the way you want them to vote and you want them to be a puppet basically and a dummy, you're a traitor. I'm going to say it right now. You're undermining the Constitution of the country and you're undermining the country's leadership. And you are destroying capitalism. You're destroying freedom because every time you have a freedom and you abuse that freedom and that abuse destroys the country, you're putting us right into dictatorship. You're forcing dictatorship on the country because when you create those kind of disorders and that kind of malformation and what would you call it, dysfunction in the political system and in the society, and you create these are our leaders, our political leaders, and they're just stooges. Do you realize what that does to the country morally as the kind of example it sets? It's just totally destructive.
Well,
So
that's why I'm for revolutionary reforms that would be considered by most so-called conservatives, because my primary impulse, in largely, not entirely, is because of national security. That's really what it comes down to. And throughout our history, as the Tierney article that you quoted talked about, things like the civil rights, like Brown v. Board, the Civil Rights Acts, uh, the legalization of labor unions, which unfortunately are being attacked, and for 40 plus years, the balance that we used to have in capitalism, the legitimate New Deal legislation like the Glass-Steagall Act, for example, this caused more of an equilibrium and a shared but earned prosperity, and that decreases the appeal of domestic extremists like the communists. And this was pointed out in the 1950s and 1960s. So there's a real national security imperative, and this is where I butt heads with even people on our side, and perhaps even with you. And this was a major red pill that I had to swallow for years. Um, But to me, so be it.
Well,
We have
you
to.
have a problem because the government is very bad and the government has the guns. So if the government starts dictating to the private sector, you've got a potential of real government corruption and a real problem there. So you whether you're dealing with autocratic government, which is a bad thing, or plutocracy, which is a bad thing. You have to find a way to create checks and balances. And what you really need in a society is you need real moral improvement. And how does moral improvement come about? When people say, "Look, I've got money, or I'm a government official. It's more important for me to be honest." And to take the hit of anything. And the problem with history, and this is just normal for human history, the people that actually take the ethical stand, they get burned at the stake, they get thrown in jail, they get pilloried, they end up, pushing a mop somewhere because they can't get a job because they are now, their name is mud, because the powers that be want puppets. The powers that be often want people to say what they want. And so we have to you have to have a quality of elite in a country, both intellectual, financial, governmental, scientific, that are not made up of weak, selfish, unethical people who are out for themselves. It doesn't work. You're going to destroy it. You're going to end up with Julius Caesar. You're going to end up with some big narcissist who gets on top of all the other monkeys and gets control. This is why they're in such a bad trouble in Russia and China and a lot of countries in the third world. That's how they end up being a banana republics. Because when your ethical level falls, especially in the elite sector, you're done. You're leaving civilization now. You're on some other track. You're headed for the Middle Ages. Well, the Middle Ages was more ethical.
So
Let's
how do
be
we
fair.
train this new elite? Where did this new elite come from? Because I think your analysis that you just gave for about a minute or two was very sound. I think you're diagnosing it like a doctor. Now, as a trained political scientist and a self-taught scholar, Renaissance man, how do you see this new elite? Because I'm a populist because I believe the government should reflect the will of the people for the most part. But at the same time, you need to have an elite and aristocracy, as you would put in an old fashioned sense, to kind of make sure everything is in order and together and that the right thing is done. Where do we go forward from there? Is this even achievable, or do we have to wait for a collapse and a war, a catastrophic war, for people to come to the fore? I'd like you to elaborate on that, please, because you give a good diagnosis, but will
Yeah,
this
it
come
might,
true?
it might, catastrophic war is one way that a country can be forced to change. Sometimes you just go into autocratic government and you lose your freedoms, you lose your republican system. Um, I think America, the Anglo-Saxon nations have something special which they're on the point of losing. And that is that it had developed back in the 18th century and maybe earlier a kind of philosophical common sense that really was strong in us, that allowed our institutions to work. And that philosophical common sense went with a kind of moral sensibility, which was connected to, our religion and religious practice and so on. But it was really deeply ingrained in our character, and it made our society, it gave us an ordered freedom that other countries didn't have. And people would look at it and say, America, it can't possibly work. They didn't understand. We had this kind of common sense. We had this ordered freedom, and we were making it work. And I think people have become self-absorbed. There's an amorality or maybe an immorality that's really crept in, a moral confusion, a disorientation. And then with the way education works, with the indoctrination, the loss of that common sense, and you see it on the right with the so many people on the right accepting the Russian propaganda. Look, this is blatantly Russian propaganda. You're believing it? Jordan Peterson, who stood up against wokeness, and now he's standing he's now repeating Russian propaganda. It's like, wait a minute, his moral compass was broken, but he just happened to sound moral because he stood up against some other bullies, but he's with these ones over here. This is really dismaying, the decline. And it's when people suffer, maybe they're going to be a revival of our values and of our intellect. Look, intellectual integrity, that is basic honesty.
Mm.
Honesty on intellectual issues, honesty about, well, wait a minute, that's the truth, that's a fact, that's not the truth, that's propaganda. That you actually have to have the will to see, not to want to see what agrees with your ideology. You have to have the will to see that. And that means overcoming a kind of inner corruption. And it is an inner corruption. I think Eric Voegelin, the philosopher, he called it pneumopathology, a spiritual pathology. And his theory was that, we have a soul and we have a spirit, and I would add, we also have a personality, right? So everything's about personality. Well, where the persona is a mask. So you're mistaking your soul for your mask. See, everything's about personality. That's a disorientation right there. But what Voegelin says is, he says, look, in traditional Greek philosophy and the ancient early church fathers, the spirit is that part that's connected to the divine, where you get the deeper, okay, I know what right and wrong was. Okay, I get it, what I'm supposed to do. Right? You get that revelation of, oh wow, I get some kind of grace for being a good person. For, like what Socrates was saying, that being just to other people was its own reward. You weren't just to keep it from happening to you, and then you go cheat when you had the chance, which was what the old sophists used to teach in ancient Greece. But you saw that it was right. You do the right thing because it's the right thing, and it comes with its own blessings, and it's good for doing it for its own sake. That kind of moral orientation has to be regained in the Anglo-Saxon world. And if we don't, we're gonna go the way of Germany and Austria. We're gonna end up with our own Führer, you know?
Well, I hope you're wrong, and well, that's. I mean, and I think also another part, and you can comment on this in line with intellectual integrity, is also an understanding that issues like politics, geopolitics, economics, society, etc., it's nuance. There requires a lot of nuance. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, the lack of nuance in people's thinking. I mean, I get it all the time. Look, people, they go to extremes. They're really angry. They introduce too much emotion. They want to simplify everything. Look, this stuff is all very complicated. And the amount of knowledge, I mean, the amount of study that you've done or that I've done. I mean, you wrote this book, which I'm really going through again, which is Golitsyn Vindicated, right?
Yeah,
And there's just,
yes.
and
Very dismaying.
it's about the split between Beijing and Moscow, and years later, and they're working together. They're doing things when they're supposed to be enemies. You've got it all documented here. You've got something like 1,500 footnotes in there, and it's just people. It helps to know something. And it helps not to just grab at these conspiracy theories and use these vague generalities that you just end up missing the whole thing, end up on the wrong side. You just can't. It's too important.
And why do you think people gravitate towards those conspiracy theories? I mean, on this show, we're very critical of the quote investment banks, Wall Street banks, but you've read my criticisms of that type of capitalism.
Hmm.
It's not conspiratorial thinking. It's about ideas, it's about psychology and things of that nature. And then all these other conspiracy theories. It's the Freemasons, it's the Illuminati, it's the Jews. Of course, everything is the Jews. I took a dump this morning. It came out red. It's because of the Jews. Why do people in your mind, based on your experience and your exposures to conspiracy-minded people, why do people gravitate toward it? What is the dirty little secret here?
Because it's simple. They don't have to learn anything. They look, it's a very simple formula. It's the devil theory, and the Jews are the devil, or the Masons are the devil, or somebody's the devil. And they are now responsible for everything bad in the world. And if we just get rid of these bad people, the world will be wonderful. And it's very vague in general, and they can pretty much, all you have to do is adopt a kind of paranoid mentality, and then all you have to do is find a Jewish name or find somebody's connection to some Masonic organization, and they'll see, there it's the proof, guilt by association. So there's what they regard as proof isn't proof. Their analysis isn't really analysis, and there's constantly being inventions. There's fabrications, there's false narratives, and it's reinvented. And the thing is that our enemies, especially the Russians, love this stuff. Because the Russians, as I've explained on other podcasts, the Russians are doing bad things, and it's really wonderful to have 31 different conspiracy theories out there that they can bury the truth about what they're doing by blaming everything they're doing on, as I've mocked before, the Dealey Lama under Dealey Plaza, and they've got the UFO aliens and the bankers and the cattlemen and the Jews, right? And they're all there, and they're all there to kill JFK in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. And it's sort of like, but the problem is, that allows them to hide what they're doing, because everybody then sees these other shadowy forces, which nobody can really pin down or prove, and it's this fun game that continues to be played. And I think I mentioned, I think it's Norman Cohen, Warrant for Genocide, very excellent book that shows that the template for these conspiracy theories goes back to Napoleon's France, to Fouché, the head of the secret police, who basically created fake information, manufactured this, fooled an abbé, a French Catholic clergyman who believed in the Jewish Masonic conspiracy, and of course repented, tore up his manuscript, but it got out. And from then on, everything in these conspiracy theories, it just keeps multiplying itself. It's like a disease. It's so attractive because it explains everything, and then it feeds into certain religious prejudices or racial prejudices. The Nazis picked up on it, the alt-right picks up on it, the Birch Society. I like their anti-communism, but they've fallen for all these it's the insiders, and it's like, well, who are they? And pretty soon you end up with, and this is what I object to. Well, wait a minute. You mean the enemies are the bankers and the capitalists and stuff? Well, your enemies are the same ones the communists are enemies with. Your enemies with the capitalists, they want to overthrow the capitalists. You want to overthrow the capitalists. It's like, this is convergence. This is right-left convergence. This is one of the strategies the communists have worked on for many years. So I think the problem is that these issues are so complicated, and I'm a strategist, and you really have to pay attention to strategy and strategic methods. It isn't just simply to know economics or to know sociology or to know history. You also have to know strategy. And you go, oh, wait a minute, that's a strategy. I've seen that before. They're practicing it on me, and they're turning me, and they're turning conservatives, or they're turning liberals, or they're turning people against each other in this divide and conquer game. And we just got to be smarter than that. We've got to unite as Americans and not allow them to do that, because the Russians and Chinese are right there, and their fifth column is right there.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. We do have to unite, because what animates my nationalism is a sense of shared destiny. This is our home. This is our homeland. Like it or not, we're born here. We want to see our neighbors, the good ones, succeed. You want to see a healthy society, people physically healthy, all the rest of it. And the fact of the matter is I'm telling you, and I'm saying this more to the audience, as much as this show is highly critical of what's going on in this country, that we can do so much better for a first world nation, I implore the audience, and I know you're out there, that you're thinking that, well, now we're poo-pooing Russia and China and stuff like that. No, they want to occupy the country. Jeff and I have discussed the proof already. It's there. It's something to take seriously. Even if they don't do it, we still have to be on guard for it. The fact of the matter is they thought of these plans, which underlies that it's a very serious issue. And they're supporting all these extremist groups in the United States in order to divide us. And you really want to be run and ruled by such individuals? I went paddleboarding today. You think I would have that kind of freedom to go to the beach, go paddleboarding, have dinner with your girlfriend or boyfriend, or go see your family and gather in a party of more than 10 or 20 people? Because in some countries that's actually illegal in history and today. Or you want to go to the target range? I'm a gun owner. I mean, I'm not going to ask if you are or not. It's not any of the show's business. I can volunteer my information. I might want to go to the target range, or I might want to have it to keep myself safe. Well, those kinds of governments with the Uhuru movement, Communist Party USA, Russia, China, you think they're going to allow us to keep that? I don't think so. This is what I'm talking about. You want to be able to have a nice meal and a proper intake of protein? Forget about it. I mean, stuff as basic as that for survival. You're not necessarily going to get this in a world under Russian Chinese hegemony. I mean, am I nuts for saying this, Jeff? Have I lost a few screws, or am I right?
Well, I mean, we need to be united as much as we can. And look, the United States is more diverse inherently than European countries. We have Native Americans, we have blacks, we have Hispanics, we have people from Asia here. So we're not going to be adopting some kind of racialism. And which is, by the way, what the left has done by saying that white people are inherently racist. It's just an inversion of racialism that way. So you've got these different ways to divide people by race. We can't allow that to happen. We have to make America work based on what America is and what America has been and all the advantages that we have. And look, we've had it pretty darn good here if we can just maintain it and we can continue it. And but it really all of our prosperity and everything we've had is ultimately based on moral and intellectual ideas. And if we lose those, and we are losing them to totalitarian ideas and to wokeism and to divisiveness, we're going to be destroyed. It's just the way it is. And we must preserve the country because there's these huge countries like Russia and China with nuclear weapons. And even if America became two countries, I know a lot of people are saying, well, we ought to be two separate countries. You won't survive because two separate Americas could not perform the defensive function of the West that America has performed. And we haven't been doing it adequately. So we've got to have some self-examination. Why have we been failing at this? Why has Russia thought itself so strong that it would commit this act of war? Why is China doing this? Are they going to use nuclear weapons on us? Serious questions. We have to face up to it. I know it's unpleasant. I'm sorry. But citizenship in a free country comes with a price, and it's time to pay up.
I mean, and you mentioned about two countries and whatnot. If I recall correctly, and please elaborate on this, that's part of a part of a Russian and even prior Soviet strategy.
Oh yeah,
Can you elaborate on that? Folks like Igor Panarin and the
Igor
Diplomatic
Panarin.
Academy. Yeah, can you elaborate on that Russian
Igor
inspiration?
Panarin's is a instructor at a KGB academy, and he said for more than 20 years that America's headed for a civil war, that it's divided, and that this civil war is going to split the country, and it's going to end up becoming broken up, and it's going to be subject to being taken over. It's going to be easy to deal with then. It's going to be done as a great power. Now you could say that's Russian wishful thinking. But really, the divisions in this country are being exacerbated. Who's doing the exacerbation? I think that the fifth column in this country that is paid for by the Chinese and the Russians, they want to see this. So the next time you look around and you see somebody trying to turn American against American, George Washington's farewell address is one of my favorite documents in American history because George Washington says, anyone who tries to divide you on any pretext is your enemy. George Washington's farewell address. Absolutely right. Anyone who tries to divide this country on any basis is an enemy of this country. Whether they're trying to divide us by class, by race, by ideology, they're an enemy.
Yeah, and his farewell address contained much wisdom, and I've quoted it in varying periods on this show, particularly some of the live streams, and ask my listeners to go through it and read it. It is widely available for people to read. But yeah, I think, I think on that we agree. And I think this is where there's really not much to disagree with this point, because both you and I, the position of this show, the position of your blog and your writings is to preserve the United States of America. We might disagree on certain policy specifics, but the point is we don't want the country to be burned down by Russia and China and their allies. And you and I have a common enemy, and they are very sinister enemies. And I'm not talking about the average Russian or the average Chinese. I know Jeff has made that point over and over again. But when it comes to their governments, absolutely. They are our enemies. It's just they say we're our enemy. I mean, it's not even me like pulling this out of my butt. It's like they say we are an enemy, and they've been saying that for as long as I've been alive during the open Cold War, and then under Yeltsin, and then Putin, and the CCP in Beijing. They continue to say we're an enemy.
Yeah. And the problem with ideology, and we should not be ideological. I'm against ideology. And you go to the left, the problem with the left was they were susceptible to communist propaganda. So they would believe a lot of the communist lies. Now today the right is believing a lot of the Russian lies. So you have it both on the left and the right. People who are ideologues are susceptible to being manipulated by people who then turn that ideology around and use it to manipulate their view of what's going on now. And it's just amazing.
Now, we picked on the left a lot, the extreme left, I should say. What do you see as the problems that you found with the right when it comes to geopolitics, economics? Obviously, they were asleep at the wheel regarding Russia and the quote end of the Cold War and refused to see. Are there any other issues you have with the right that you've encountered personally?
Well, free trade and this idea that capitalists should be allowed to trade with whoever they want. That there should be a check on this, on the national security, and that we have to combat plutocracy. So
Mm.
that some of the things that the left does, the left has been co-opted by plutocracy too. So it's not so simple anymore. And the right, the libertarian right, they seem to have confused some, and I think Ludwig von Mises and the Austrian school is got some very excellent things, but they have not read it properly. Go back and read it properly. Um, it is a system of logical understanding through ideal types, like Max Weber's sociological methodology. It is not literally true. It is a reasoning and ideal types to gain understanding and insight into economic processes. It is not a political ideology.
So it's a sort of starting point, and then you just kind of is what you're saying. You're right. It is ideal types, and that's one of the
Right.
pitfalls, as I see, with free market ideologues,
Well, the
is they
problem
have the
is, yeah,
ideal types and
they
they
don't
ignore
understand. Yeah,
externalities.
they don't understand the sociological methodology. They don't understand the social science methodology. So they've mistaken it for some kind of higher truth, and so it all of a sudden it becomes like a religion with them. And the thing is that it really isn't. You have other, man does not live by bread alone, as somebody famous once said. So it's not just all about economics. We're not just Homo economicus, and so we have to have a much broader view. of society, of people, of the political process, so that the political process cannot become the complete usurpation of economic elites usurping the political process. We actually need kind of a culture, which our business community is part of the culture, but we need government and we need religion. We need the church, the spiritualizing function, the defense of society function, which the state provides, and the culture. But these functions cannot break out of their domain and tyrannize over the other function and mute it. And so that's what's happened, is that the desire to make money has come in and said, oh, the government can't do this. We can't build these weapons and we can't have this security regime because it's going to hurt business. No, you can't come out of your domain and dictate to the political domain that we cannot have defense. And it's one thing. The other thing is to turn religion into a business, make it into the Jesus business. I'm sorry, that's not right. Both of my grandfathers were ministers in the Evangelical Covenant Church. Oh, they would have been horrified at the way money is rolled over now and in the evangelical church business. And I'm sorry, there's just a lot of rotten things going on. So the government's been corrupted, the religion has been corrupted. And there's two forms of corruption, by the way. The communists have corrupted everywhere, but there is a market corruption too that we have to be realistic about, which is, by the way, enabled the communist corruption.
Yes, and I talk about that a lot, on how, from my point of view, how Reaganomics actually pushed more and more people for the left. There used to be much more of a balanced form of economy that existed before Reagan, and that's upended that. And I did a whole rant called, it was my rant against the Lord of the Flies economy, as I termed it. And I literally read verbatim quotes on why people got recruited as neo-Nazis like Matt Heimbach and DSA, Democratic Socialists. And I'm sorry, they have legitimate concerns. I mean, they have legitimate points that they make. It's not untruthful. And that has opened my eyes on, strategically as a strategist, how do you combat the appeal of the domestic left? It's not enough to just expose them through congressional committees, through the usage of our intelligence services, which we need to do, but we have to take away their appeal. We have to steal their thunder.
Well,
that doesn't make me popular in right-wing circles.
Well, it's very important to realize, look, I'm a person of the right. I believe in aristocracy, and we're not going to be able to get it back unless the society sort of collapses and it sort of organically forms. But look, there is no utopia. I hate to break it to you, but we are not going to form a perfect society. There's not going to be a society anywhere on this earth without injustice, without inequality, without all kinds of problems. And the real question is not that you're not going to have an elite, because every single system, as Robert Michels pointed out years ago in his book Political Parties, very famous book in political science, all political systems are oligarchic. There is no such thing. Democracy itself is just another way of organizing oligarchy. That's a fact. Now, the sooner we get used to the fact that there isn't a democratic utopia, and there isn't an economic, there's not a libertarian free market utopia, and there's not a socialist utopia. As soon as we get that through our thick skulls and we start dealing with reality and facts the facts of human nature, and attempting to have some kind of checks and balances and have some kind of reasonable system, it's the only way we're going to get close. And the real ultimate reform is a reform right in your head and in your heart. That's the real reform. And okay, a leader is the person who's the first to stand up there and take hits. The lady that saved France in the 15th century, Joan of Arc, they burned her at the stake as a heretic. So you want to do something good for your country? It's not going to be nice for you, because it never is. Everybody's going to say you're wrong. You have some foul motives. The people who do have foul motives are going to be standing there ready to burn you at the stake. But that's what we actually need: heroes. We need people who are going to do things for the right reason, which is asking an awful lot. But if you just have a few people like that, oh my gosh, it makes such a huge difference. It changes the whole world. And so
Yeah.
that's what I would say. That's what we really do. We depend on a few people. We depend on Providence. We depend on a few people that really do just amazing, are amazing people who do something good. We've had amazing people in American history. You know, Washington, the founding fathers, amazing people, the leaders of the Civil War that we had that did amazing things, and of course, we need that again. We're facing a crisis. We can't have um, a guy in the White House anymore who's got so much corruption that you wonder why he hasn't been impeached or arrested, and a Congress and a Supreme Court and a Justice Department that doesn't seem to be doing everything they should be doing to make the system honest.
Yeah, exactly. I'm for reform. I agree with you. I don't think we could have a perfect society. It's never happened yet to date historically.
No.
That's just being historically honest. I think we can do a lot better for a first world country by the great masses of people. Elites, it's going to be inevitable. And that's why I said I actually had a conversation DMing on Twitter with a possible future guest. And, you know, and I've mentioned this on the show before, don't mistake my populism, my suspicions of the established economic and political elites for me just wanting to take them out and wipe them out of existence. We want
Yeah,
a
see,
government.
I don't believe in, look, people have this desire for revenge. I don't think violence,
Yeah, I'm not into
uh,
that either. And that,
revolution, stuff like this. No, I mean, look, I'm suspicious of the elites, but I'm suspicious of the people, and I'm suspicious of me, right?
yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
do I have an ulterior motive here? What, I mean, look, we all have to keep ourselves clean. We have to help each other. I mean, it's just in the nature of human nature, right? And oh my gosh, I'm 64 years old. I remember this country when I was a kid. Wow, what a country we had,
Mm.
right? What a country we had. And can we get back there? Maybe not. Maybe we can. But wouldn't it be great if if we adopted a higher standard for ourselves and everybody started doing it? I mean, it wouldn't be utopia because we can't all do it, and there's going to be bad people and bad things are going to happen, but it could be better.
And we always have to strive better. It's like our health. You've taken care of your health, Jeff. You've worked out and everything. You always strive to be better. Since my divorce, I did the same thing too as well, and lost tons of weight and everything else, built up muscle, improved things on other fronts. Am I perfect? Far from it. But there's always room for improvement, and that's where I think the leadership is so lacking because they've been corrupted, in this case, largely like plutocracy, which you're right, is harnessed by Russia and China. They use it in the greed war as a quoted presentation's title on the website chinascope.org, where
Hmm.
they wrote about how China exploits the greed of Western conservatives and libertarians and their capitalist backers, most of them, because there are also patriotic capitalists, which I try to
Yes.
also explain on this show. Not every business person is equal in perfidious activities. I mean, yes, for every Larry Fink of BlackRock or Paul Singer, who I've railed against, who destroyed that town of Sydney, you look up what happened with Cavala's. You have also people like Aaron Feuerstein, who I encourage everybody to look him up, who was the CEO of Malden Mills, and when his factory burned down, he kept on paying his employees. He was a hard-nosed boss who expected production and his workers to produce, but he compensated them properly and he did right by them. And he said it was his understanding of Orthodox Judaism that actually formulated his values. So, I do want to make nuance that in the populist coalition that I would like to see, the Radical Civic Nationalist Coalition, it's not per se a class-based movement where it's just solely working class, but it has room for other classes, including business people like Mr. Feuerstein, who unfortunately recently passed away. these are people that could be leaders, or are wealthy people as well as poor people who have the right values and the right ideas and the right impulses to be leaders in a new political movement. And I think in your book, Jeff, your first book, The Origins of the Fourth World War, if I recall correctly, I mean, I could look it up in my book because I quoted you. You even called for this sort of new patriotic movement that would be free of this selfish point of view. And I believe I'm quoting you correctly. What do you think a new patriotic movement should look like? Do you think it should be like a multi-class, multiracial movement, as I'm arguing? Do you have some other things to add? What are your thoughts? What was your intention when writing that? I know it was a long time ago.
Well, yeah, obviously, look, I kind of think of myself as an old-fashioned federalist, right? Like Washington and Hamilton. I know there's always problems with every party and every program, but what we really need now is we need unity, and we need to look to our national security, and we need to be able to name our enemy. We need to be correctly oriented. We have to know that communism, Marxism, Leninism is not dead. It's in our country. It's got its octopus. There's the corrupt Chinese business interests mixed in with ours. They have access to our capital markets. They have access to our science. We have to get it disentangled. This is a really difficult problem, thorny problem. And it means that people are going to have to accept financial losses, and the country is going to have to accept some level of suffering to do it. But we have to have a divorce from China. And I'm not anti-Chinese for the Chinese people. I'm anti-CCP. I'm anti the criminals in the Kremlin in Russia. If those countries, I tell you, if those countries can get free, the world's going to have a very interesting future. But if we can get rid of those kind of regimes. But the problem is our own ideological the false thinking of the left and of the right that has indoctrinated people with these people are enemies and false narratives about what is true and what isn't. We have to get back to truth and intellectual integrity. That's really hard.
It's very hard. We all have our predisposed notions, but it takes a certain amount of discipline. You try to discipline your minds and to look at issues and analyze issues fairly, and with a certain level of integrity and nuance. I mean, I really couldn't have said it better. You couldn't have said it better, pretty much. So, well, is there anything else you wanted to add? I think we covered pretty much everything, including the kitchen sink.
We're going quite late, so we're almost 2 hours, so we better stop now before I keel over face down on the desk here.
Yeah, but you're doing so well. You're staying awake, and you're very energetic with your points, so you're doing great there. But anything else you wanted to conclude with? Because I know you're doing most of the talking, so you must be tired. So it's
yeah, no, it's good. I mean, yeah, go to my website, nyquist.blog, read my stuff, get my book. I got a new book coming out this next month in August.
Do tell.
The Lies We Believe In. It's been out in Brazil for almost a year, and it should be good. It helps clarify some things. And,
where can they find it? Where could the people find it?
Well, it's going to be on Amazon when it comes out, so I'll be advertising it on my website, but you can go to my essays on jrnyquist.blog. So.
And also, let me put in an additional plug for your other materials too, as well, if you don't mind. Mr. Nyquist, or Jeff Nyquist, he also has his book, Origins of the Fourth World War, which is available on Amazon.com, as well as you go to the meta search engine bookfinder.com. You can get it through those sources. I think, Jeff, you could also you've mentioned people can get it directly from you. Can you elaborate on that?
I have a couple hundred copies here in my basement, So I don't like, I'm awfully busy right now, so I don't really like spending a day at the post office mailing.
Um,
I did that one day last week, but I will do it if people want to order it. It's $25. My Amazon at jrnyquist.com, which is my email associated with my website. If you go on my website and you look at About, it gives my name. And of course, my book now that I really want to sell is The Fool and His Enemy, which is on Amazon. So yeah, definitely go read it. It's a quick read. I think you can read it in 3 hours, and it kind of outlines everything there as well.
Yeah, I've given copies of your Origins of the Fourth World War away to people, donated it to libraries. So it's an excellent book. You have to buy it, people. Audience, you have to buy Origins of the Fourth World War and Fool and the Enemy. But more importantly, you gotta buy Origins of the Fourth World War because it revolutionized aspects of my thinking. So buy it, please. And make sure you follow also Jeff Nyquist blog. Where can we access the blog again, the website?
jrnyquist.blog,
Oh,
jrnyquist.blog.
great. Thank you so much, Jeff, for appearing on the show and taking all your time off to talk with the program. And we'll be talking soon.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye bye.